welcome to Five Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is Lawrence Cunningham. Larry is a leading authority on corporate governance and culture, as well as on Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett. He has written several books on value investing and is the authorized editor of the Essays of Warren Buffett, Lessons for Corporate America. In my opinion, it's one of the best books on business out there. A professor of business law at George Washington University, his latest book is Berkshire Beyond Buffett, The Enduring Value of Values. Larry worked with dozens of executives from Berkshire subsidiaries to put this book together. Let's ask him 5 good questions. Welcome, everybody. My guest today is Lawrence Cunningham. He's the author of Berkshire Beyond Buffett. Larry, thanks for coming on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
I have to admit that I'm actually, I consider myself a bit of a Buffett aficionado and a Buffett geek, but I feel like you put me to shame when I mean that completely as a compliment.
Well, thanks. Everyone keeps calling this a deep dive, and I hadn't thought of it that way, but I really like that idea that it's, down 200 or 300 feet, whatever a good deep dive is. So it's more than people typically go.
Yeah, I feel like that what Alice Schroeder did for Buffett the man in The Snowball, you've done for Berkshire the company in the same way of cataloging the evolution of it. It's really great.
Well, thanks very much, Jacob. I appreciate that.
So, Larry, you ready for 5 good questions?
I am. I love the concept.
All right. Question number 1. First off, what's your definition of a moat?
Oh, well, I guess I follow the canonical definition that it is a durable competitive advantage that protects a business's profitability and long-term prospects. And so they come in a variety of forms, and people have cataloged the classifications in a lot of different ways. I like what Bruce Greenwald did. He really tried to boil it down to a relatively finite, simple set of a few things, but they can still have a variety of merchandising capability, product branding, costs of entry, and so on. And Berkshire obviously has companies that have a wide variety of moats. And right, so the question, I don't know if you're moving on, but the question I ask in the book, in a way, is, gee, if Berkshire's subsidiary companies all need to have a moat and tend to have moats, does Berkshire need a moat? Does it have one?
Yeah. What would you say that the parent overarching companies, their overarching moat would be?
Well, this is what I come out with in the book. I mean, and I start first with possibilities that I then rule out. And one possibility would be Warren Buffett, the iconoclastic founder, leader, builder of that company, and he's the sort of the face of the company, and certainly has a set of skills that are very difficult to compete with, very difficult to match. But the reason I wouldn't leave it there is because one element of the definition of moat is that it's got to be durable. And so a person, while contributing enormously to a competitive position, competitive advantage, wouldn't be a moat within that definition. And the second thing is the capital resources, especially through the insurance companies. And again, while I think those are formidable, a very strong competitive advantage, very difficult for anybody to match the capital strength, the balance sheet size, and so on. There are potential rivals. And the market that I'm really talking about when I talk about Berkshire having a competitive advantage and needing one is the rivals in the acquisitions market. So private equity firms, LBO operators, other conglomerates, and even insurance companies are strategic buyers for some of the particular businesses. So capital strength is important. It's a part of Berkshire's strength, but it more contributes to the moat rather than defines it. So what I finally figure out is that there's a core set of common values that animate all of Berkshire's operating subsidiaries, and it's those core values that define Berkshire's identity, give it a corporate culture, give it a path, a special place that is very difficult to replicate, that can, and I think properly managed and led, will endure. And so that combination, to me, adds up to a moat for Berkshire Hathaway. So long as everyone, protects it, all moats need to be protected and widened. And so long as people within the company get that this culture, these special features of the business are part of its moat, I think it will be sustainable and durable within my definition.
Yeah, that's a great segue for question number two, and it has to do with Berkshire's reputation. Buffett has a famous quote about it takes 20 years to build reputation and 5 minutes to lose it, and that you should act accordingly. Is there any way to measure how that reputation manifests itself into economic gains? So whether it's a specific example like a discount that Berkshire receives from when they buy a company, that the seller is willing to take less money because they're selling to Berkshire.
That's a great example, and reputation is one of the 9 values that I identify in the book as part of Berkshire's moat, part of what makes Berkshire itself distinctive, and that distinctiveness is also a feature of virtually all of the subsidiaries. Virtually all of the subsidiaries also enjoy strong reputations in their worlds, and the leaders and managers of those companies invest considerably in reputation. They share Warren's quip about 20 years to build a reputation. You can lose it in a minute. And you are right that at the Berkshire level, reputation translates into economic gain because sellers of businesses will very often be happy to sell to Berkshire at a lower price than they could get elsewhere or than would be fair in a market valuation, because Berkshire offers a reputation for a variety of things, integrity in and of itself, but also a reputation for allowing its managers to run their own shows. And so many people, especially entrepreneurs, trying to find a home for their businesses are particularly happy with Berkshire because they know that they will be able to call their own shots and not be micromanaged. And so that's one reason an entrepreneur might sell to Berkshire at a price less than a rival bid or less than fair market value. And similarly, Berkshire has a reputation for permanently owning the subsidiaries that it's acquired. It hasn't sold a subsidiary in 40 years, and its test for selling a subsidiary is very generous. That a company has to be doomed to failure for Berkshire to sell it. So a company that struggles, and we've got several right now that are struggling, whether NetJet, See's Candy, Pampered Chef, even John's Manville, there's no consideration that, well, gee, maybe we'll sell this one. Maybe it's too much of a dog and we ought to get rid of it. There's no thought of that. The idea is let us maintain it at a minimum, and as long as it doesn't absorb a lot of capital, we'll continue to nurture it. And so people value that sense of permanence, that sense of autonomy, especially family businesses, but others. And they will likewise sell to Berkshire at a price below rival bids or market values because they assign some value, some economic price to that promise, that reputation for permanence and autonomy. And this question of how reputation translates into economic gain at the subsidiaries is best illustrated by an example I include in the book about Clayton Homes. That's the Tennessee-based manufacturer of trailer homes and also a leading lender to people who tend to buy those trailers, who tend to be lower income people or fixed income people. Well, Jim Clayton, the man who founded that company, who I've gotten to know, had a very unusual approach to building and lending. He'd sit down with his customers and figure out what their income was and what their assets were, and then work backwards to build homes and make loans that fit their budget. And that was extraordinary. As we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of rivals didn't do that. They would instead simply try to build the biggest home and make the biggest loan to people who really couldn't afford it, so that when the crisis hit, those people couldn't pay, their homes were foreclosed, and many of those lenders went out of business. Well, the effect of that was that Jim Clayton's company went from being a strong number 4 in the industry to number 1. So that's an example, and I sat down with Jim, and he's like the most solid, earnest, salt of the earth kind of guy, and he just thought, that's the way to do business. I mean, he cares a lot about his reputation, or I call it reputation. I mean, he just thought of it in terms of how to be with your customers. Like, that's the right way to be. And why? Yeah. Well, because you don't want to chisel, cheat, or scheme. You want to be direct and forthright and good. And then the upshot of that, as I tell it in the book, is that doing right by people in that way is actually not only the ethical or moral, correct human thing to do, it's also the profitable thing to do. So, and again in the Berkshire companies, we see how that interest in reputation invariably turns into an economic gain. So I agree with you entirely, Jacob. Reputation is a big part of Berkshire, and it starts with Warren and his joke about the 20 years, 1 year,
Yeah.
and it just and it percolates straight across the subsidiaries. All the men and women who built and led these companies tend to embrace that idea.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's almost refreshing, that kind of old-fashioned approach to business these days. Like, we've gotten so used to expecting someone to try to take every last penny off the table, that when they don't, all of a sudden you feel like you want to reciprocate back to them.
That's so true, Jacob. And I'll tell you, you asked before we began the formal interview about the book tour. So I'm out at different cities around the country talking about the book to a wide range of audiences. And one of the subgroups within the audiences has been this group of people who, in some way or another, are skeptical of corporations in general. That corporations have, as a group, gotten a bad reputation in America. And one of the delightful things that I've heard so often from this subgroup is what you just said, that it's refreshing to hear that there are corporations who believe in basic principles of the golden rule, things we're all taught in third grade, in elementary school, that there are companies out there that still behave that way. And it's not as if they're being altruistic or abandoning the duty they owe to their owners to generate good returns on capital, but that they see that it's perfectly possible to be good and profitable at the same time. So that's one of the neatest things that I've found so far with the book and on the tour is some group of Americans who think, you know what, I have a new view, a new hope in corporate America.
Yeah, I think it probably comes from a little bit longer term approach. Like, are you optimizing for the short term or for the long term? So if it's short term, then you're probably going to be more transactional based versus the relationship of the long term.
Excellent point. And Clayton Homes is a good example of that. That, from 2000 to 2008, they were number 4 in their industry. They were not gaining and winning. It looked like Fleetwood or Champion, I forget the rivals who went bust, but it looked like they were winning. They were making more in the short term. But then, as you said, that sort of focus can really skew your sense of what is right and what will work, not just tomorrow, but 10 years, 15 and 20. And that's how Jim Clayton has always operated at Clayton Homes. And you're entirely right that a long time horizon is a staple quality of all the Berkshire subsidiaries. That starts at the top too. As you know, I quote in the book that Warren sends a directive to his CEOs every 2 years, and it's an astonishingly modest directive. There are only 6 things on it, and they fit on a half a page, really. And one of them is to protect the company's reputation. That's just a statement. And the other is to think about your business on a 50-year time horizon. You think about your business and assume that it's the only asset that your family owns, and that you can't sell it, pledge it, hypothecate it, or whatever for 50 years. 50 years. I mean, that's, in corporate America, there's a tendency, I think, for people to think of long term as 5 years or 7.
Yeah, or next year.
or even next, right? So, yeah, Berkshire is very unusual, and you're entirely right that I think that and it's not easy, and I don't mean to criticize people. It's very easy to think only about tomorrow or only about next year, or even for private equity firms to think, gee, I know exactly what's wrong with this company. I can fix it in 2 or 3 years and flip it. There's probably a place for that in the economy, but that's of course not what this book is about. Or
sure.
What I'm really saying in this one is there's a really valuable place for the company that can look out 50 years. A big argument in my book is I hope that we will continue to have an environment where that kind of company is possible.
Yeah. So let's move on to question number 3. And this one has to do with, this is actually kind of a personal question that I have. That's something I haven't been able to square with my understanding of Mr. Buffett. And it goes down to, I know that he has a compulsion for just very extreme capital allocation, like making sure that each dollar goes to the right, the most profitable place. And as an example of that, it's kind of, I've never seen it written anywhere, but going to the Berkshire meetings every year, he had this bet with a fund of funds, like a hedge fund, and he it was a zero coupon bond that they had purchased that would be maturing, and it was going to go to charity, whoever won this bet. And it had to do with whether the S&P 500 would do better than a fund of funds. So it turns out that Buffett, he actually got out of that bet by pledging, his personal amount of money so that he could buy Berkshire stock with it instead of this zero coupon bond. So every dollar for him has to be put in the right spot.
Right.
Okay. So then that's one part of it. And then the other part that I have a hard time squaring is that this trust to the point of abdication that they practice at Berkshire, where they basically let the subsidiaries really operate on their own and really just say, hey, mail in checks, if there's extra money laying around back to Omaha. That I have a really hard time putting those two things together, that he could just let capital kind of float out there nebulously and not even really knowing exactly what's going on versus having every penny, allocated in the best possible way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the first example is a more personal one. So I think he attaches strings to himself, right? That he looks after every dollar, all 100 pennies of it. Whereas in the organizational model of letting the subsidiary managers lead and make strategic decisions, he's willing to be off by a few more pennies. It's not 100%. He gives them latitude because probably over the longer term, those guys will be better at allocating capital in their units than he would be. That said, the managers do have to generate returns on capital over periods of years. So that if a company simply is unable to demonstrate an ability to do that, their capital allocation from Berkshire will go down maybe to zero. And good examples of those kinds of companies are, they could be otherwise wonderful companies. It's just they're not growing, and they're not able to generate high returns on excess capital. Good examples of that are Steve's Candies and Scott Fetzer. And they just don't have, they have not proven that they are able to generate high returns on capital in the way that the others are, so that they're able to, and they're very profitable. I mean, Steve's Candies generates 80 or so million in profits a year. So, but it's just, it doesn't have opportunities to reinvest those funds at the same levels as BNSF Energy, BNSF Railway or Berkshire Hathaway Energy. So Brad Kinchler at Steve's will be sending a big check up to Omaha, and the same is true of Scott Fetzer. But I think with all of these fellows, that the trust-based model of delegation that Warren tells the CEOs, just do these 6 things. Those fellows then, turn around and report periodically. There are no rules about how to do it, and each fellow really does it their own way. Some of them call in and do that often. Some of them write a monthly report. Some of them check in once a year. There's sort of different levels of that. So it's a very loose rein, but the eye is on. And what you see is a pretty effective capital allocation mechanism. So if James Hambrick at Lubrizol, for instance, has a strong sense that he could use $1 billion that he probably generates, or 2 or 3 that he'd need an infusion, he keeps Buffett enough up to date so that when an opportunity like that arises, he's able to say, look, here's an opportunity. And it might be like that pipeline lubricants business of Phillips 66 that they acquired at the end of 2013. James is like, Jay, here's a $1.4 billion opportunity. Maybe I've got close to that, but maybe not. Give Warren a call and the deal is done. And so, and with Greg Abel, at Berkshire Hathaway Energy, where he is making very large investments in acquisitions, some $5 billion or $7 billion, and some smaller ones too, $500 million, $800 million in renewable energies like wind and solar and stuff like that. Greg's doing a lot of that on his own, but he's checking in fairly regularly, sometimes weekly and so on. So it is a very informal model, and there's definitely a huge amount of trust in it. But it's not as I wouldn't say. So I think Warren definitely gives his lieutenants, his managers, a little more latitude than he gives his own pocketbook, his own checkbook. I think he thinks that over periods of time that model is more valuable, is more likely to produce superior incremental returns on capital than one where he insisted on a bookkeeping record and a specific kind of report from each of these fellows.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's also pretty conflict adverse. So, just going with the flow seems to have worked pretty well for him.
I've noticed that too. It's interesting that you noticed that. It's hard to document, but that's an inference I make too. I mean, one bit of evidence. I mean, maybe you have some additional evidence. Is when a CEO disappoints in some way or another, whether and I give in the book maybe 6 or 8 examples of a CEO disappointing in one way or the other. He is not fired. He's not embarrassed. I mean, it's a very subtle, almost counseling out. Gee, I don't think this is a fit, and I don't even have a script. I don't know what the phone call is like, but it's not broadcast. It's not advertised, and it's so I infer that he doesn't like the big conflict, and incidentally, I kind of like that personally. How I am too. I tell my students, I teach in a law school, and half of lawyers are in court fighting all the time and enjoy the conflicts, and the other half of us are in boardrooms and deal rooms trying to negotiate friendly solutions
to stay out of the courtroom.
To stay, yeah, exactly. So I'm very much sympathetic to the conflict aversion thing, and I think that's probably one of the ingredients that makes managers respond. They appreciate the trust, and they appreciate that they are probably not that keen on conflict either. So it's a nice culture, and it does. I'm pretty sure it does start at Berkshire. It starts at the top, but the neat thing is that these subsidiaries all tend to have brought that kind of culture with them too. So it's a nice reinforcing.
Right. They didn't buy anything that needed that kind of a shaping.
Exactly. Very good. Well put. Exactly right.
I think that's a good segue to question number 4, and this has to do with after Buffett is gone, he's obviously so revered by all of his managers. Everybody wants to produce well for him. Is there any concern for Berkshire that same imperative won't be there when it's the new guy that it's like, well, that's not Warren. I'm going to try to do well, but I'm not going to kill myself like I would to really impress Warren.
Yeah, and I've heard that concern stated by many people outside of the research for my book. The research for my book, which included interviews with a lot of the CEO subsidiaries, and asking that kind of question and probing for that kind of peculiar motivation. Is your motivation to excel, to be excellent, and so on, a personal one because of Warren Buffett, or is it personal because of something about you? Tom Menente, Bruce Weber, Bruce Whitman, Tony Nicely. Is it because of Warren? Is it the top, or because something about you? And these people tend to be modest, so they don't say, well, it's me. I'm a very motivated fellow. But I do get the sense that while Warren is an important part of it, he's a charismatic leader, and people do things for him. I do think a big part of it is the character of these men and women who are at Berkshire, and they're not there accidentally. They're there because they had the same kinds of values that Berkshire has, and that attracted them to Berkshire. So yes, I think that there's something to that, but it's far from everything. And that it's not, look, you could, if the successor alienated people, if Warren's successor were a jerk, really made you not want to come to work, really made you feel mediocre or something. I mean, that would have a negative and opposite effect. I mean, the leader of the company is obviously very important. But for that part of my argument, in my belief, is that since the board has told us that the successor will be chosen from among the ranks of the subsidiary CEOs, and my assessment of those people is that they have these qualities of they understand the importance of trust, reputation, integrity, the long term. They've been drinking the Berkshire culture. So I don't want to overstate the argument that I make. I mean, it's sort of that the institution has been structured for the greatest possible chance of durability. But if you got the wrong person in there, you could ruin that. Or they made the wrong decisions. If they made decisions that undermine some of these values, you could ruin Berkshire. I mean, it's not, and like any institution has that fragility. the key thing that I'm taking away that I found in the research is that there's a lot more strength and durability in there than many people have seen.
Yeah. So that's a good segue for question number 5. And this has to, obviously this isn't the first time that there's been a key man that at the helm of a big company. Is there anything that we can take from the Pritzker-Marmon transition that you actually talk about in your book that might foreshadow what we might see at Berkshire when that terrible day eventually comes?
That's a great one, Jacob. Thanks. Yeah, I do think the Marmon Group is a good model for Berkshire and its future. The Marmon Group was built by Jay and Bob Pritzker, famous Chicago businessmen who had a lot in common with Warren Buffett. In fact, Warren knew Jay as a younger man. Warren, probably 20 years younger than Jay had been, and admired his business strategy. Jay and Bob did a similar kind of thing in building the Marmon Group to what Warren has done in building Berkshire. They were opportunistic, acquisitive, believers in autonomy. So they bought companies, they tended to hold them. Bob was an engineer, an industrial engineer, so he occasionally did some turnarounds and did some fixing, but nevertheless revered autonomy and gave his managers as much of it as you could possibly imagine. So the company, after being built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, was in 100 different lines of business, a dozen different industries, the most diverse conglomerate that you can imagine. And Bob and Jay, sitting at the top of it, were very much delegators. So you had all these autonomous operators, and it's just like we've been discussing. I mean, these guys believed in reputation. They had long-term time horizons. They did a lot of capital allocation on their own at the subsidiaries. The subsidiaries were active acquirers too. So it looked very much like Berkshire Hathaway, just a little smaller. It's probably so in 2008, Bob and Jay Pritzker had passed away. Bob Pritzker stepped down and died a few years later. He turned leadership of the Marmon Group over to a fellow named John Nichols, also a Chicago businessman who had been the CEO of the Illinois Tool Works, which itself is a huge conglomerate, with even more diverse than either Berkshire or Marmon Group, hundreds of different lines of businesses. But the similar set of principles of autonomy, of a long-term horizon, built by acquisitions, and so on. And when Bob Pritzker asked John Nichols to enter Marmon Group, John said, "Well, this is a tall order, taking over from the iconic Pritzker brothers." And he said, "Look, I share Bob Pritzker's management style, Warren Buffett's management style too, of the long-term autonomy and so on. But John thought." Bob built this company bit by bit over 30 or 40 years, just as Warren built Berkshire bit by bit over 30 or 40 years. And John said, there's no way that I could know as much as Bob did, just as there's no way any successor to Warren can know as much as Warren did, even if a person had a higher IQ or whatever. So John said, I'm going to keep these management principles in place, but in order to make it work, he created 10 divisions within Marmon, and each of them had a separate president who had autonomy and then reported up to John. So there's a slight centralization, incremental bureaucracy, but still with that number, it made it manageable while those individuals could still mostly call all their own shots. And so that explanation for what John did, and Frank Paddock, who has succeeded John Nichols at the Marmon Group, has followed that same path. And I think there are now 13 instead of 10 division presidents, and still a sprawling conglomerate. And it would make total sense to me if Warren's successor decided to do a similar kind of thing. And it's, the model really worked at Marmon of simultaneously sustaining the grand and successful tradition while enabling someone who wasn't there at every minute, like Warren, to manage it and keep it together. So, and there are many other, that chapter on I have a whole chapter in the book about the Marmon Group because I found it to be such a strong parallel to the Berkshire situation. It's a much smaller company, but the reason it had to essentially find a new home, find a new owner in Berkshire was primarily due to disagreements among a wide number of members of the Pritzker family, Jay and Bob's children and their children, a sprawling family group who they're all great, wonderful, very successful business people. There's a large number of people who had ownership of the company and had a lot of different views about the way forward. And that's a big difference with Berkshire. There is no such family. Warren owns it, owns a big block, and his will provides for that to be distributed to the marketplace essentially through foundations. So that's that part of the analogy is missing. We don't need to worry about it. It's not as if we need to. Who would buy Berkshire Hathaway? That's not really the question. It's just
right.
Can successors adapt a management model that enables its continuity without disturbing what's special about its history?
Right. Great. Well, those are our 5 questions. Our bonus 6th question that we always ask is a book recommendation. And we prefer something that you've given away a lot or that you think is kind of underrepresented out there that's, kind of a hidden gem. What do you have for us?
Well, it's what the hardest question. No, the other ones were relatively easy in comparison because I've given a lot of different books away. I own and admire a lot of different books, obviously. So it's kind of hard to choose. And what I worked on it though, and I chose a book. This is the book by David. I've got the cover here. I don't know if you can see this. This is by David Bornstein, How to Change the World. David was the Librarian of Congress for many years. He's the author of many books, a real intellectual, a real observer of society. And what he does, and this is a collection of essays about people who he calls social entrepreneurs, people who use their innovation, imagination, energy with a business dimension to deal with challenges like poverty, childhood education, health crises from AIDS to other epidemics. And it's a set of inspiring stories about leadership. It's 10 or so years old, but still, but really speaks. I think it resonates today, particularly with people involved in impact investing, Bill Gates and so on. So I think it's underappreciated. I just put in a plug for that one. But I see you're sitting in a room full of books there. Obviously, the thing to do is to read as much as you possibly can.
Sure. Well, we really appreciate that recommendation. Larry, it's been great having you on, and I keep up the great work. I mean, your first book, The Essays of Warren Buffett, is like just a icon for. It's an MBA in a couple hundred pages, and your new book here, Berkshire Beyond Buffett, is also very good, and just keep up the good work for all of us Buffett followers.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to do both of those books, and the opportunity to meet with folks like you is really terrific. So thank you very much.
Great. Larry, have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
All right.